In the heart of the American Southwest lies a land unlike any other, New Mexico, the land of enchantment. Here, ancient Pueblo cities rise from red rock mesas. Spanish missions stand as monuments to colonial dreams, and the atomic age was born in secret desert laboratories. This is a place where three cultures, Native American, Hispanic, and Anglo, have shaped a unique American story spanning over 1,000 years. From the sophisticated cliff dwellings of the ancestral Puebloans to the cutting-edge research of Los Alamos, from the royal road of Spanish conquistadors to the wagon ruts of American pioneers, New Mexico's story is one of resilience, innovation, and cultural fusion. Today, we'll journey through this remarkable history, a tale of ancient wisdom and modern discovery, of conquest and survival, of tradition and transformation. Welcome to New Mexico, where the past and future converge under endless southwestern skies. Chapter 1: The Ancient Ones. 10,000 BCE to 1540 CE. Long before Europeans dreamed of a new world, New Mexico was already ancient. The story begins over 12,000 years ago, when the first humans crossed the Bering land bridge and gradually made their way south. These Paleo-Indian peoples arrived to find a dramatically different landscape, one where massive mammoths and giant bison roamed lush grasslands, and lakes filled what are now dry valleys. Near the town of Clovis, archaeologists discovered some of the most important evidence of these early Americans. Distinctive spear points that would give their name to an entire culture. The Clovis people were master hunters, capable of bringing down the largest animals of the Ice Age. But as the climate changed and the megafauna disappeared, these early inhabitants had to adapt. The Folsom culture followed, specializing in hunting the smaller bison that survived the climate change. Their exquisitely crafted points represent some of the finest stone tool technology ever developed. But even these people would eventually give way to new cultures as the Southwest continued to evolve. Around 6,000 years ago, the Archaic period began. People learned to live in harmony with the desert environment, gathering wild plants, hunting smaller game, and gradually developing agriculture. Corn arrived from Mexico around 2000 BCE, followed by beans and squash, the three sisters that would become the foundation of southwestern civilization. As agriculture developed, so did more complex societies. People began building permanent villages, creating pottery, and developing sophisticated trade networks that stretched from the Pacific coast to the Great Plains. But it was around 700 CE that something truly extraordinary began to emerge in the American Southwest. In a remote canyon in northwestern New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloan people, once called the Anasazi, began constructing what may have been America's first civilization. Chaco Canyon became the center of a vast network of communities connected by roads, trade routes, and shared ceremonial practices. Pueblo Bonito, the largest of the great houses, contained over 600 rooms and stood 4 stories tall. Its builders used sophisticated astronomical alignments, advanced engineering techniques, and imported materials from hundreds of miles away. The Chacoans developed a complex society with specialized craftspeople, long-distance traders, and elaborate religious ceremonies. From Chaco, a network of roads stretched across the Four Corners region, connecting dozens of outlying communities. These roads were built with remarkable precision. Many are perfectly straight for miles, engineered to move people and goods across the challenging southwestern terrain. But the Chacoan system was not destined to last forever. By 1150 CE, the great houses were largely abandoned, possibly due to drought, environmental degradation, or social upheaval. The people didn't disappear. They moved on, carrying their knowledge and traditions to new homes. Some moved north to the cliffs of Mesa Verde, where they built spectacular cliff dwellings that seemed to defy gravity. Others moved east to the Rio Grande Valley, south to the Mogollon Mountains, or west to the Hopi Mesas. By 1300 CE, the ancestors of today's Pueblo peoples had established communities along the Rio Grande and its tributaries. These villages at Cochiti, Santo Domingo, San Ildefonso, Taos, and dozens of other locations became the foundation of Pueblo culture as Spanish explorers would encounter it 2 centuries later. These Pueblo communities developed sophisticated agricultural systems, creating intricate irrigation networks and terraced fields that maximize the use of scarce water. They became master potters, weavers, and artists, creating works of beauty that continue to influence Southwestern art today. Their religious and social systems were equally sophisticated. Kivas, circular ceremonial chambers, served as centers for community rituals that connected the people to their ancestors, the natural world, and the cosmic order. Petroglyphs and pictographs throughout the region record their beliefs, their history, and their deep spiritual connection to the land. When European explorers first entered New Mexico in 1540, they encountered not a wilderness, but a land that had been home to sophisticated civilizations for over a millennium. The Pueblo peoples had developed sustainable ways of life in one of North America's most challenging environments, creating communities that had endured for generations. But the arrival of Europeans would challenge everything, beginning an era of profound change that continues to this day. Chapter 2: Spanish Conquest and Colonization, 1540-1821. In 1540, the clash of two worlds began. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led the first major Spanish expedition into what is now New Mexico, searching for the legendary 7 cities of gold. What he found instead was a network of Pueblo communities along the Rio Grande. Sophisticated, but not wealthy in the gold and silver the Spanish sought. Coronado's expedition was a disaster by Spanish standards. After 2 years of searching, he found no cities of gold, no fountain of youth, no passage to Asia. His men fought bitter battles with Pueblo defenders at villages like Hawiku and Tigex, establishing a pattern of conflict and misunderstanding that would define Spanish-Pueblo relations for generations. Disappointed and nearly bankrupt, the Spanish abandoned New Mexico for 40 years. But they would return, driven by a different motivation, not gold, but souls. In 1598, Juan de Oñate led a new expedition north from Mexico, this time to establish a permanent colony. Oñate brought with him 600 colonists, 83 wagons, 7,000 head of livestock, and a clear mission: to claim this land for Spain and convert its inhabitants to Christianity. Oñate's colonization was brutal. When the people of Acoma Pueblo killed several Spanish soldiers, Oñate ordered a devastating attack. The 3-day Battle of Acoma in 1599 resulted in the deaths of over 800 Acoma people. Survivors faced harsh punishments. Men over 25 had 1 foot cut off, and many were sentenced to 20 years of slavery. Despite these violent beginnings, Spanish colonization continued. Oñate established the first capital at San Gabriel, near present-day Española. Spanish settlers, soldiers, and Franciscan missionaries began the long process of imposing European culture on the Pueblo world. In 1610, Pedro de Peralta founded a new capital, La Villa Real de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Asís, or simply Santa Fe. The Palace of the Governors, built that same year, still stands today as the oldest continuously occupied public building in the United States. The Spanish colonial system rested on 3 pillars: the encomienda system that granted colonists control over Pueblo labor, the mission system designed to convert native peoples to Christianity, and the presidio system of military posts to defend the colony. Franciscan missionaries established churches in most Pueblo villages, often building directly on top of sacred kivas and ceremonial plazas. They banned traditional religious practices, destroyed religious objects, and severely punished anyone caught practicing the old ways. Yet the colonial period was not simply one of oppression. Over decades, a complex process of cultural blending began. Spanish colonists adopted Pueblo agricultural techniques, pottery styles, and architectural features. Pueblo peoples learned Spanish crafts, incorporated European crops and livestock into their economy, and developed new forms of artistic expression. The colonial population became increasingly diverse. Spanish soldiers married Pueblo women. Nomadic peoples like the Navajo and Apache traded with both Spanish and Pueblo communities. Genizaros, detribalized native peoples, formed their own communities and served as intermediaries between different groups. New Mexico became a crossroads of trade. Every 3 years, great caravans would arrive from Mexico City, bringing manufactured goods, chocolate, and luxury items in exchange for hides, piñon nuts, woven goods, and Native American slaves captured in raids against nomadic tribes. But beneath the surface, tensions continued to build. Spanish demands for tribute, forced labor, and religious conversion grew increasingly burdensome. Pueblo religious leaders went underground, secretly maintaining their ceremonies and training new generations in the old ways. In 1680, these tensions exploded in one of the most successful Native American uprisings in North American history. Led by a San Juan Pueblo medicine man named Pope, Pueblo communities across New Mexico coordinated a simultaneous revolt against Spanish rule. On August 10, 1680, Pueblo warriors struck Spanish settlements throughout the colony. They killed over 400 Spanish colonists and priests, burned churches and government buildings, and drove the remaining 2,000 Spanish colonists south to El Paso. For 12 years, the Pueblos governed themselves, destroying symbols of Spanish rule and reviving traditional practices. The Spanish made several unsuccessful attempts to retake New Mexico before Diego de Vargas finally succeeded in 1692. But the reconquest was not complete until 1696, and it came at a terrible cost. More battles, more destruction, more deaths on both sides. The post-revolt period saw important changes in Spanish colonial policy. Forced conversion became less common, and Pueblo religious practices were tolerated as long as they remained private. A pattern of accommodation emerged, with both Spanish and Pueblo communities finding ways to coexist while maintaining their distinct identities. The 18th century brought relative stability to Spanish New Mexico. The population grew slowly through immigration and natural increase. Spanish colonists developed their own distinct culture, blending traditions from Spain, Mexico, and the Pueblo world. They created a unique architectural style, distinctive forms of folk art, and new musical and literary traditions. But new challenges emerged from the plains and mountains. Apache and Comanche peoples, armed with horses acquired from the Spanish, launched increasingly devastating raids on both Spanish and Pueblo settlements. These raids shaped colonial life, forcing communities to develop new defensive strategies and creating a militarized frontier society. Spanish New Mexico developed a distinctive frontier character. Towns were built around central plazas that could serve as fortresses during raids. Adobe architecture reflected both Spanish and Pueblo traditions, while providing practical defense against both enemies and the harsh environment. Isolated from the centers of Spanish culture, New Mexican colonists developed their own religious art traditions. Santeros carved wooden saints and painted religious scenes on wooden panels called retablos. These folk artists created a unique synthesis of European Catholic and indigenous American artistic traditions. In 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain, and New Mexico became a Mexican territory. But for most New Mexicans, this distant political change had little immediate impact. They continued to live as they had for generations, speaking Spanish, practicing Catholicism, and maintaining the cultural patterns established during the colonial period. The Spanish colonial era had created something entirely new in the American Southwest, a tricultural society where Spanish, Mexican, and Pueblo peoples had learned to coexist, each maintaining their own identity while contributing to a shared regional culture. This complex heritage would soon face its greatest test as a new power began to look westward from beyond the Great Plains. Chapter 3. The Mexican Period, 1821 through 1846. Mexican independence in 1821 brought dramatic changes to New Mexico, though many were slow to reach this distant northern frontier. Under Spanish rule, New Mexico had been a closed province where foreign trade was forbidden and outsiders were unwelcome. But the new Mexican Republic opened its doors, setting in motion forces that would transform the region forever. The first major change came with trade. Mexico legalized commerce between New Mexico and the United States, opening what would become known as the Santa Fe Trail. American entrepreneurs quickly recognized the opportunity. Manufactured goods that cost dollars in Missouri could be sold for many times that amount in Santa Fe's starved markets. The trail began in Independence, Missouri, and stretched 900 miles across the Great Plains to Santa Fe. The journey took 2 to 3 months and was fraught with dangers: river crossings, storms, equipment failures, and the constant threat of Indian attacks. But the profits were enormous. A wagon that cost $150 to load with goods in Missouri might return a profit of $1,500 or more in Santa Fe. Soon, hundreds of wagons were making the journey each year, carrying everything from calico cloth and hardware to books and pianos. Santa Fe was transformed. The sleepy colonial plaza became a bustling marketplace where American traders mingled with Mexican merchants, Pueblo artisans, and Plains Indians. The annual arrival of the trading caravans became the year's biggest event, bringing new goods, new ideas, and new challenges to traditional ways of life. Many American traders stayed in New Mexico, marrying into local families and becoming Mexican citizens. Men like Charles Bent, Ceran St. Vrain, and Kit Carson became prominent figures in New Mexican society, serving as bridges between American and Mexican cultures. The trade brought prosperity to some New Mexicans, but also increased inequality. Wealthy merchants and landowners profited enormously, while ordinary farmers and artisans often found their traditional crafts displaced by cheaper, manufactured goods from the eastern United States. Meanwhile, Mexico itself was experiencing severe growing pains. Political instability in Mexico City led to frequent changes in government and policy. New Mexico often went months without clear direction from the central government, forcing local officials to make their own decisions about trade, defense, and administration. American influence grew in other ways as well. Mountain men and fur trappers began exploring the mountain regions of New Mexico, mapping new routes and establishing trading relationships with various Indian tribes. These mountain men, Kit Carson, Jim Bridger, Jedediah Smith, became legendary figures who helped spread knowledge of the Southwest throughout the United States. The Mexican period also saw significant changes in religious life. The Mexican government secularized many missions, transferring their lands to private ownership. This weakened the Catholic Church's influence, but also led to the abandonment of many mission buildings and the dispersal of Indian communities that had been organized around them. Mexico continued the Spanish tradition of making large land grants to encourage settlement and development. Some of these grants were enormous. The Maxwell Land Grant eventually covered nearly 2 million acres. These grants would later become sources of major legal disputes when the United States took control of the territory. As trade increased, so did American settlement. While most Americans were temporary traders, some came to stay. They established farms, ranches, and businesses, gradually increasing the American population in the territory. This growing American presence created tensions. Many New Mexicans resented what they saw as American arrogance and insensitivity to local customs. Americans often complained about what they perceived as Mexican inefficiency and corruption. These cultural misunderstandings would have serious consequences as political tensions between Mexico and the United States increased. The Texas Revolution of 1836 heightened these tensions. Mexico's loss of Texas made Mexican officials increasingly suspicious of American intentions in the remaining northern territories. Several American expeditions to New Mexico were seen as potential invasions and were met with military force. As relations between Mexico and the United States deteriorated in the 1840s, New Mexico found itself on the front lines of an international dispute. The Mexican government strengthened its military presence in the territory and began preparing for possible war. Yet daily life in New Mexico continued much as it had for generations. The population remained overwhelmingly Hispanic, with Pueblo communities maintaining their distinct identity within the larger society. Spanish remained the dominant language, Catholicism the dominant religion, and traditional arts and crafts continued to flourish. The Mexican period saw the development of a distinctive New Mexican Hispanic culture that blended Spanish colonial traditions with influences from central Mexico and the American frontier. This culture expressed itself in architecture, art, music, and cuisine that would become defining characteristics of the region. But political uncertainty continued to plague the territory. New Mexican officials often found themselves caught between the demands of a distant and unstable Mexican government and the realities of life on the northern frontier. This uncertainty made many New Mexicans wonder whether their future lay with Mexico or with the expanding United States. By the mid-1840s, the United States was in the grip of manifest destiny, the belief that America was destined to expand across the entire continent. President James K. Polk was determined to acquire California and New Mexico, either through negotiation or war. When diplomatic efforts failed, war became inevitable. In 1846, the long-simmering tensions between Mexico and the United States finally exploded into open conflict. New Mexico, which had been a crossroads of cultures and commerce, was about to become a battleground that would determine its future forever. The Mexican period had lasted only 25 years, but it had transformed New Mexico from an isolated Spanish colony into a crossroads of international trade and cultural exchange. The foundations had been laid for the American conquest that was to come, but also for the tricultural heritage that would make New Mexico unique among American states. Chapter 4: American Conquest and Territorial Period, 1846 to 1912. On August 18, 1846, General Stephen W. Kearny stood in Santa Fe's Central Plaza and claimed New Mexico for the United States. The transition seemed almost anticlimactic. Governor Manuel Armijo had fled without a fight, and the American Army of the West had marched 900 miles from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, without firing a shot in anger. Kearny promised the people of New Mexico that their rights, property, and religion would be protected under American rule. Many New Mexicans seemed willing to accept the change, hoping that American rule might bring greater prosperity and protection from Indian raids. But not everyone accepted the conquest peacefully. In Taos, a group of Mexican officials and Pueblo leaders began planning resistance. They were led by Pablo Montoya and Tomas Romero, who saw the American occupation as an illegal invasion of their homeland. On January 19, 1847, the resistance struck. The Taos revolt began with the assassination of Charles Bent, the American-appointed territorial governor, at his home in Taos. Bent was scalped and killed along with several other American officials. The revolt spread to surrounding communities, but it was poorly coordinated and quickly suppressed by American troops. The American response was swift and brutal. Rebel leaders were tried in makeshift courts, and several were executed. The message was clear: resistance to American rule would not be tolerated. The broader Mexican-American War ended in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico ceded nearly half its territory to the United States, including all of present-day New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado, plus parts of Wyoming and Kansas. Mexican citizens in these territories could choose to become American citizens or retain Mexican citizenship. Establishing American territorial government in New Mexico proved challenging. The territory was vast, its population diverse, and many of its new American citizens spoke little or no English. Cultural misunderstandings were common, and many Anglo-American officials had little sympathy for local customs and traditions. New Mexico became entangled in the national slavery debate. The Compromise of 1850 allowed the territory to decide for itself whether to permit slavery. But few enslaved people were ever brought to New Mexico. The territory's economy was based on small-scale farming, ranching, and trade, rather than the plantation agriculture that depended on enslaved labor. The California Gold Rush brought thousands of Americans through New Mexico, and some stayed to establish businesses or farms. The territory's Anglo-American population grew slowly but steadily, changing the demographic balance and creating new political dynamics. The American military established a network of forts throughout the territory to protect settlements from Apache and Navajo raids. These conflicts intensified during the Civil War, when federal troops were withdrawn for service in the East, leaving New Mexican communities more vulnerable than ever. In 1862, Confederate forces from Texas invaded New Mexico, hoping to capture the territory's gold mines and gain access to California. The invasion culminated in the Battle of Glorieta Pass, often called the Gettysburg of the West. Union forces, including Colorado volunteers and New Mexican militia, defeated the Confederates and saved the territory for the Union. The Civil War also brought one of the darkest chapters in New Mexico's history: the forced removal of the Navajo people. Colonel Kit Carson, the famous mountain man who had become a Union officer, was ordered to round up the entire Navajo Nation and move them to a reservation at Bosque Redondo. Carson's campaign was devastating. His troops destroyed Navajo homes, crops, and livestock, forcing the people to surrender or face starvation. In 1864, over 8,000 Navajo people were forced to walk 300 miles from their traditional homeland to the barren reservation at Bosque Redondo, a journey they call the Long Walk. The Bosque Redondo experiment was a complete failure. The land was unsuitable for farming, supplies were inadequate, and disease was rampant. After 4 years of suffering, the government finally allowed the Navajo to return to their homeland in 1868, establishing a reservation in their traditional territory. The post-Civil War period brought new hopes for development. Railroad surveys identified possible routes through New Mexico, and territorial leaders lobbied intensively for rail connections that would link them to national markets. In 1879, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad finally reached New Mexico, arriving in Las Vegas before continuing to Santa Fe and eventually to California. The railroad transformed the territorial economy, making it possible to ship goods to distant markets and bringing tourists and new settlers to the region. The railroad enabled a mining boom that brought rapid growth to many parts of the territory. Silver mining at places like Silver City, coal mining in the north, and copper mining in the south created boomtowns and attracted thousands of new residents. The railroad also transformed ranching. Cattle could now be shipped to eastern markets, making large-scale ranching profitable. This led to the era of the great cattle barons and the cowboy culture that would become legendary in American mythology. But the American period also brought serious problems. Land grants that had been recognized under Spanish and Mexican law became subject to American legal procedures that many Hispanic landowners couldn't navigate. Unscrupulous lawyers and speculators acquired many traditional lands through legal technicalities, dispossessing families that had lived on them for generations. These injustices led to organized resistance. In the 1880s and 1890s, groups like Las Gorras Blancas, the White Caps, cut railroad fences, burned buildings, and intimidated Anglo settlers in an effort to protect Hispanic land rights. While their methods were controversial, they highlighted the serious problems of land tenure in the territory. Despite these challenges, Hispanic and Pueblo communities worked to preserve their cultural traditions. Religious festivals, traditional arts and crafts, and Spanish language education continued in many communities. The Catholic Church remained a central institution, providing continuity with the past, even as the political and economic system changed around it. Throughout the territorial period, New Mexican leaders campaigned for statehood, but several factors worked against them. The territory's Hispanic majority, the perception that New Mexicans weren't American enough, and national politics that often ignored Western interests. Gradually, American-style institutions took root. Public schools were established, though they often required instruction in English and discouraged the use of Spanish. The University of New Mexico was founded in 1889, and various religious denominations established schools and colleges. A vibrant press developed, with newspapers published in both Spanish and English. Hispanic New Mexicans became increasingly active in territorial politics, with leaders like Miguel Otero Sr. and Jr. serving in important territorial positions. By 1900, the territory's population had become more diverse. While Hispanic New Mexicans remained the largest group, significant Anglo-American and Native American populations had created a truly multicultural society. Railroad towns like Albuquerque and Roswell had grown rapidly, while traditional communities like Santa Fe and Taos maintained their historic character. The early 20th century brought progressive-era reforms to New Mexico. Territorial governors implemented civil service reforms, improved education, and worked to combat political corruption. These reforms helped make the territory more acceptable to national political leaders. By 1910, the statehood movement had gained unstoppable momentum. The territory had demonstrated its capacity for self-government, its economy was growing, and its population was becoming more Americanized. National attitudes toward Hispanic Americans were also slowly improving. The Constitutional Convention of 1910 brought together representatives from all of New Mexico's diverse communities. They crafted a document that protected minority rights, guaranteed the use of Spanish in government and education, and created a framework for democratic government that respected the territory's unique cultural heritage. After 66 years as a territory, New Mexico was finally ready for statehood. The long journey from Spanish colony to Mexican territory to American state was nearly complete. But the challenges of building a successful state from such diverse cultural and economic foundations were just beginning. Chapter 5. Statehood and the Modern Era, 1912, present. On January 6, 1912, President William Howard Taft signed the proclamation making New Mexico the 47th state. After 66 years as a territory, New Mexico had finally achieved full membership in the American Union. The celebration in Santa Fe was jubilant, but the real work of building a state was just beginning. The new state faced enormous challenges. Its population was scattered across a vast territory with poor transportation and communication networks. The economy was still largely agricultural and dependent on mining, making it vulnerable to boom and bust cycles. Most critically, the state had to forge a unified identity from its diverse Hispanic, Anglo, and Native American populations. William C. McDonald, the state's first governor, was a cattle rancher who understood the challenges facing rural New Mexico. His administration focused on building basic infrastructure, roads, schools, and government institutions that could serve the state's far-flung communities. World War I brought New Mexico into the national spotlight in unexpected ways. The state contributed more soldiers per capita than almost any other state, with many Hispanic New Mexicans serving with distinction in France. The war also brought federal spending to the state in the form of military bases and defense contracts. In 1916, the revolutionary leader Pancho Villa raided the border town of Columbus, New Mexico, killing 18 Americans. This attack led to General John J. Pershing's punitive expedition into Mexico, which was launched from New Mexico and brought thousands of federal troops to the state. The 1920s brought a period of growth and optimism to New Mexico. Oil was discovered in the southeastern part of the state, creating new wealth and attracting new residents. Tourism began to develop as Americans discovered the state's unique cultural attractions and dramatic landscapes. The completion of Route 66 across New Mexico in the late 1920s opened the state to automobile tourism. The famous highway brought thousands of travelers through Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and dozens of smaller communities, providing new economic opportunities and exposing the nation to New Mexican culture. Artists and writers began discovering New Mexico's unique appeal. Taos and Santa Fe became famous artists' colonies, attracting painters like Georgia O'Keeffe, writers like D.H. Lawrence, and photographers like Ansel Adams. These artists helped create a romantic image of New Mexico that attracted tourists and new residents. The Great Depression hit New Mexico particularly hard. The state's dependence on agriculture and mining made it vulnerable to the economic collapse, and many families faced severe hardship. Unemployment reached desperate levels, and many small farms and ranches were abandoned. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal brought significant help to New Mexico. The Civilian Conservation Corps established camps throughout the state, employing young men to build roads, trails, and facilities in state and national parks. The Works Progress Administration funded construction projects and supported artists and writers. The Dust Bowl brought thousands of refugees from Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas through New Mexico. Some stayed, adding to the state's cultural diversity and changing the demographic balance in some communities. World War II transformed New Mexico more dramatically than any event since the American conquest. The federal government established numerous military installations in the state, taking advantage of its wide open spaces, clear skies, and remote locations. The most significant of these installations was Los Alamos, where the world's first atomic bombs were designed and built as part of the top-secret Manhattan Project. Beginning in 1943, the government constructed an entire city on a remote mesa northwest of Santa Fe, bringing together the world's leading scientists to work on the ultimate weapon. On July 16, 1945, the world's first atomic bomb was detonated at Trinity Site in the desert of southern New Mexico. The successful test paved the way for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending World War II and beginning the atomic age. The war's end didn't diminish New Mexico's importance to national defense. Los Alamos became a permanent national laboratory, and other military installations continued to bring federal dollars and high-tech jobs to the state. Sandia National Laboratories was established in Albuquerque, making the city a center for nuclear weapons research. The atomic age brought an unexpected resource boom to New Mexico. Uranium deposits throughout the state became enormously valuable, and mining towns like Grants experienced rapid growth. Native American communities, particularly the Navajo Nation, found themselves at the center of the uranium industry. But the post-war period also brought new civil rights activism to New Mexico. Hispanic veterans returning from World War II and Korea demanded equal treatment and opportunities. Organizations like the GI Forum fought discrimination and worked to improve educational and economic opportunities for Hispanic Americans. The 1960s saw renewed activism around land grant issues that had never been fully resolved. Reyes Lopez Tijerina and the Alianza Federal de Mercedes led dramatic protests, including the takeover of the Kit Carson National Forest and a raid on the Tierra Amarilla courthouse, demanding the return of lands they claimed had been illegally taken from Hispanic communities. Native American communities also became more politically active. The Taos Pueblo's successful campaign to regain Blue Lake, a sacred site that had been incorporated into the Carson National Forest, became a symbol of the broader Native American rights movement. In 1970, President Nixon signed legislation returning the lake to the Pueblo. The 1960s and 1970s brought a cultural renaissance to New Mexico. Chicano artists and writers explored their heritage and identity, creating new forms of artistic expression that celebrated Hispanic New Mexican culture. Native American artists also gained national recognition, and the state became known as a center for contemporary indigenous art. New Mexico's role in the nuclear industry also made it a center for environmental and anti-nuclear activism. Protests against nuclear weapons testing, uranium mining, and proposed nuclear waste storage facilities brought national attention to environmental issues in the state. The late 20th century brought efforts to diversify New Mexico's economy beyond its traditional dependence on federal spending, agriculture, and extractive industries. High-tech companies were attracted to Albuquerque and Santa Fe, taking advantage of the scientific expertise at the national laboratories. Tourism became increasingly important to the state's economy. New Mexico marketed itself as the land of enchantment, emphasizing its unique tri-cultural heritage, dramatic landscapes, and artistic communities. The state's distinctive cuisine, architecture, and arts and crafts attracted visitors from around the world. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act of 1987 allowed Native American tribes to operate casinos, providing new economic opportunities for pueblos and reservations throughout the state. Gaming became a significant industry, generating revenue for tribal governments and creating thousands of jobs. The late 20th and early 21st centuries brought significant demographic changes to New Mexico. The Hispanic population grew through both natural increase and immigration from Mexico and Central America. The state also attracted retirees from other parts of the United States, drawn by the climate, culture, and cost of living. Despite its many attractions, New Mexico continues to face serious challenges. The state consistently ranks among the poorest in the nation, with high rates of poverty, unemployment, and social problems. Educational achievement lags behind national averages, and many rural communities struggle with economic decline. The 21st century brought a new energy boom to southeastern New Mexico, with the development of the Permian Basin's oil and gas resources. Advanced drilling techniques unlocked vast reserves, bringing new wealth to the state, but also raising environmental concerns. New Mexico has also positioned itself as a center for the emerging commercial space industry. Spaceport America, built in the desert near Truth or Consequences, is designed to serve as a launch facility for space tourism and commercial satellite launches. Throughout these changes, New Mexico's various communities have worked to preserve their distinct cultural traditions. Spanish language education has experienced a revival. Native American languages are being taught to new generations, and traditional arts and crafts continue to thrive. Today, New Mexico remains one of America's most culturally diverse states. Its tricultural heritage continues to shape its politics, economy, and social life. The state serves as a bridge between the United States and Latin America, a laboratory for renewable energy and space technology, and a showcase for the successful blending of different cultural traditions. As New Mexico moves forward into the 21st century, it faces both challenges and opportunities. Climate change threatens traditional ways of life, but also creates opportunities for renewable energy development. Economic inequality remains a serious problem, but the state's cultural diversity and natural resources provide foundations for future growth. The story of New Mexico is far from over. This land of enchantment continues to evolve, finding new ways to honor its rich past while building toward a promising future. Conclusion: The Land of Enchantment. The story of New Mexico is ultimately a story about the enduring power of place. For over 1,000 years, this high desert land has shaped the peoples who have called it home, and they, in turn, have shaped it. From the sophisticated astronomical observations of the ancient Chacoans to the cutting-edge space research at Spaceport America, New Mexico has always been a place where human ingenuity meets the challenges of a demanding but beautiful environment. What makes New Mexico unique in the American experience is its success in maintaining cultural diversity while building political unity. Unlike other regions where conquest led to the disappearance of indigenous cultures, New Mexico has found ways for Native American, Hispanic, and Anglo traditions to coexist and enrich each other. This cultural synthesis is visible everywhere. In the adobe architecture that blends Pueblo building techniques with Spanish colonial design, in the cuisine that combines Native American ingredients with Spanish and Mexican cooking methods, in the arts and crafts that merge ancient techniques with contemporary innovations. Yet New Mexico's story is not without its dark chapters and continuing challenges. The violence of conquest, the displacement of native peoples, the struggles over land and water rights, the problems of poverty and inequality. These are all part of the state's complex heritage. But perhaps most remarkable is the resilience that all of New Mexico's peoples have shown in the face of these challenges. Pueblo communities have maintained their cultural identity through 5 centuries of change. Hispanic families have preserved their language and traditions despite waves of assimilation pressure. Anglo communities have learned to appreciate and participate in the state's multicultural heritage. The land itself remains central to New Mexico's identity. The vast skies, the dramatic mesas and mountains, the rivers that bring life to the desert. These natural features have shaped human culture here for millennia and continue to influence how New Mexicans see themselves and their place in the world. New Mexico has always been a place of innovation and adaptation. The ancient Puebloans developed sustainable agriculture in an arid environment. Spanish colonists created new institutions to govern a diverse frontier society. Mexican and American periods brought new technologies and economic opportunities. Today, the state continues this tradition of innovation in fields ranging from renewable energy to space exploration. The future of New Mexico will depend on its ability to build on this heritage of innovation while addressing persistent challenges. Educational achievement, economic development, environmental protection, and cultural preservation are all part of the ongoing work of building a successful 21st century state. The symbols on New Mexico's state flag, the Zia sun symbol representing the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, and the 4 times of day, reflect the state's understanding of itself as a place where different worlds meet and find harmony. This has been the central theme of New Mexico's story from its beginning. From the ancient kivas of Chaco Canyon to the modern laboratories of Los Alamos, from the Spanish missions along the Rio Grande to the railroad towns of the High Plains, from the Navajo Nation to the high-tech corridors of Albuquerque, New Mexico continues to be what it has always been. A crossroads where different peoples, different ideas, and different ways of life come together to create something new and uniquely American. This is the land of enchantment, where the past and future converge under endless southwestern skies, where ancient wisdom and modern science work together to solve tomorrow's challenges, and where the American dream continues to evolve in its own distinctive way. The story of New Mexico is a reminder that America's strength has always come from its diversity, its willingness to learn from different cultures, and its ability to create unity without uniformity. In a nation sometimes divided by differences, New Mexico offers a different model, one of cooperation, synthesis, and mutual respect. As we look toward the future, New Mexico's example suggests that our greatest challenges can become our greatest opportunities when we learn to see diversity not as a problem to be solved, but as a resource to be celebrated and shared. In the land of enchantment, that lesson has been learned well, making New Mexico not just a unique place in America, but a unique gift to America.